Hi, everybody. My name is Lissa Weinman. I'm a member of the board of the Windham World Affairs Council. It's a new board of some new people, some old people. Isak and Rose Shaul, who've been doing such a terrific job with the organization for the past 5 years, have stepped down. And we really appreciate all they've done over the past several years to highlight the speakers and events that have really made the Windham World Affairs Council an important presence in our community. Julie Snorik as chair and Claire Morgana Gillis as co-chair, along with all of the other board members, are going to work very hard in the year ahead to put on even better programming. And in order to do that, we would love to have everyone's membership and suggestions and help. As you know, we're the smallest World Affairs Council in the United States. We're an all-volunteer run organization, and we provide these kinds of conversations for free to all and accessible to all, and that's very, very important to us. So we would appreciate your membership. It helps us to allow us to do that, and you can join on our website, which is windhamworldaffairs.org. We are so excited today to have with us local daughter of Brattleboro, Jody Williams, Nobel Peace Prize winner. Jody is an incredible force of nature, and I know that we've been interested for a long time in having her join us. So we're so thrilled and fortunate to have her kick off our fall season of events, of these monthly webinars. So this is our trial run, and it couldn't be with a better person. Jody Williams received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 for her work with the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. She founded that group in 1992, and in 5 short years, she built a coalition of almost 1,200 NGOs from around the world that came together and forced governments to join them to ban landmines globally. It was a creative, wonderful effort, and she's never stopped fighting since then. She also is really a very courageous person, and she worked in Central America, in El Salvador, during some of the worst days of the Civil War there. And she made her mark there as well. She's going to speak today about what human security really means. She's going to talk about how we all can be part of a change in priorities that can take a focus away from weaponry and war toward the real human needs that everyone needs to have met and that are going unmet in so many places in the world today. She's going to talk a little bit about her work with Pope Francis and the Vatican on this level, and really to have a change of paradigm and make peace something that's a realistic goal that serves us all. So we're thrilled to have her talk about that. She also formed in 2006, she helped found the Nobel Women's Initiative. It's a group of women laureates, Nobel laureates, that works worldwide to empower women's organizations all across the planet to do better work and harness the power of that Nobel Prize for efforts, grassroots efforts worldwide. I would like to let everybody know that if you'd like to ask a question, you can either raise your hand at the bottom of the screen, or you can just click the Q&A icon on the bottom and type in your question. And Julie Snorik, who is the host of the meeting right along with me right now, and I will moderate and try to get all your questions answered. So there's Julie right now. So I'd like to turn it over to Jody right now. She'll speak, I don't know, Jody, about 20 to 30 minutes or so, and then open it up to Q&A. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. And if you can unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted.
Great.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you, Julie. I'm sorry that after all the years that people have tried to get me to come and speak at the Windham World Affairs Council, I finally come now when we can't be together. I apologize for that. I know it's not my personal fault, but it is rather bizarre to me that here I am finally, and it's virtual. But such is life, right? Hopefully someday we will not be virtual anymore. We'll see how that goes. I'm going to talk, as Lissa said, a bit about national security versus human security. I think when most of us hear the word security, we think national security, the security of the institution of the state. And in national security theory or frameworks, if the civilians who live in the state are also safe, that's great, but that is not the purpose of national security. It is really to assure that the functioning of the state can continue during war. The state, the US would argue that I am full of it, but they are the ones who are full of it. And they are so full of it that they spend 57% at least of the discretionary budget of the United States of America every year on weapons, military, and war. I've been working on weapons since, when did I start? Well, as Lissa said, I started really early in '91 on a campaign to ban landmines. And as the campaign grew from 2 NGOs with a staff of 1, me, to ultimately, I think we ended up being 1,300 in 90 countries around the world. It was a time when also the United Nations was beginning to talk about human security. Human security instead of national security, or human security being the primary focus of security. You know, you probably need, just like you need police because people don't obey the law, you probably need some sort of force for self-defense, not for invading every country in the world that you think you should be able to invade because you want to. So human security, as the late Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, said, it's a world in which people live free of want and free of fear, okay? It means that everybody everybody in the world, we'll stick with the US, everybody in the US, because we have enough trouble here, everybody in the United States would have housing, would have free education, access to health care, work that is dignified and worthy of the name, pay that allows them to live securely, climate change would be dealt with. We could go on and on and on. But the point of security is meeting the needs of people themselves, not the needs of keeping the institution of the state secure. If we think about COVID right now, and somebody said to you, are you feeling secure in this COVID world? The first thing that would come to your mind, I would bet, would not be, oh my God, we need new killer robots, weapons that on their own can kill people. We need modernized nuclear weapons. That is not the first thing that comes to most people's mind. What comes to their mind is, when is this hell going to end? Why did this country do such a bad job in dealing with COVID from the beginning? How come $15.6 billion has gone into the nuclear budget when $8.3 billion was passed in March of this year to deal with COVID, to deal with prevention, to look for a vaccine that hopefully someday would free us from isolation? That's what we think about. We don't think about, where are my nukes? We don't think about, oh my God, can I have my own killer robot? That terrifies me too. I think about, you know, I'm free to be armed and walk around in the street, right? When can I start saying, well, I need my own killer robot? There is a distorted logic that could lead one there. I'm going to take a second and see, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. There we go. So this, numbers are numbing, as they say. This shows the discretionary budget of the United States of America. Discretionary because things like Social Security, etc., are things that are not supposed to be touched by the government itself, other than to give everybody what they're supposed to get for Social Security. This is the budget that the government and people can spend as they wish. I want you to just take a second or two and stare at that budget request. This is Trump's 2020 discretionary request of $1.3 trillion. $1.3 trillion. Okay. You will notice that the defense part of that budget takes up 57% of that budget. And then Veterans Affairs, they do deserve care, takes 7% more. Homeland Security takes 4% more. The energy budget actually contains $15.6 billion hidden in the energy department to work on the modernization of nuclear weapons. We don't need modernized nuclear weapons. We need to get rid of them. Now, if you look at this and look at the 57% outright that we can see, and then you think about the State Department, okay, which is supposed to conduct our foreign policy and, you know, deal with the multilateral world where the US used to be some sort of leader. Look at its 3%. Think about what that means. That means that the Pentagon is the agency of our government that is determining foreign policy in one way or another. It certainly isn't State Department and international aid with just 3% of the budget. Look at education, 5% of the budget. Imagine if that defense budget was broken down between education, housing, and urban development, throw in a climate change part of the budget, et cetera, et cetera. Imagine what this country would be like. We could pay for education worthy of the name for every student in this country if we did not allow the government to put 57% in defense. And I would wager that many people listening or looking at this have never taken the time to look at a pie chart, have never seen how much money our taxes do that. If you did not think it was insane before, I hope you start to wonder about why this is and why they get away with it. In all of my years of activism, and my first protest was against the war in Vietnam at the University of Vermont in May of '71. I have never heard a question made of a candidate for the Senate or the House or president asked, what does national security mean to you? I would like somebody to ask, you know, a Senate candidate, what does national security mean to you? Does it mean that we can spend 57% of our budget on the Pentagon? Does it mean that we can spend, I think it's 44.9% of our money on modernizing nuclear weapons? We were supposed to have given them up decades ago. What would a candidate answer? And if they answered that they want killer robots, they want weapons that on their own can target and kill human beings, and they think making new nukes is a great thing, we should ask them why. Why is it a great thing to give 57% to defense and 5% to education? You know, the founding fathers pointed out that the fundamental strength of a nation is the education of the people who live in it. And we have not done right by the people in this country with the education as it is now. You have great education if you're rich. You do not if you live in the inner city, for example, or
We're having a problem with Jody's, I don't hear you, Jody. If everybody could just stand by, we're going to try to figure out what happened with Jody's sound and image. So
I think Jody just left, so we might, there, she's coming back.
She's coming back in.
there I am.
There you are.
I somehow cut myself off. Maybe I was sick of listening to me. I'm serious. So the trend should be toward more human security, more money going to help people in the world, not to build bigger, better, faster weaponry. And when we started banning landmines, we started a shift in thinking about what disarmament is. Normally, disarmament is seen as nation states discussing and debating amongst themselves while trying to maintain their own power and influence. And in that discussion, deciding how much they could give up of their weapons. Landmines did not think about it that way. We thought about the impact of those weapons on the civilian population during and after war. Once the wars end, landmines never go home with the soldiers, like their guns, et cetera, et cetera. They stay in the ground, and then everybody who is wounded, mutilated, killed is a civilian. Think about that. So we started to think about disarmament as centered on the impact on human beings, right? These weapons, we call them weapons of mass destruction in slow motion. These weapons should be banned because you never know where you might step on a landmine if it's, you know, a former war zone. It's insane. And that began toward humanitarian disarmament and looking at other weapons through a humanitarian lens, which goes kind of hand in hand with human security, right? If I'm looking at disarmament in terms of the human people, the humanitarian impact, not the impact on soldiers in war, the impact of people during war and after. That's humanitarian disarmament. It's something like 70 or 80% of the people killed in wars today are civilians. We need to look at disarmament from that framework, not from the security of the state. And then we banned landmines, as you said, Lisa, in 1997. In 2008, cluster bombs were banned, with the same vision, right, of taking care of human beings, of civilians. I don't know how many of you know what a cluster munition is. It's a bomb dropped from a plane. It opens up and little bomblets, you know, drop out and explode when they hit the ground or a person or a building, or they don't. And then they're super dangerous. I was in Laos a couple of years ago, and we went to the Plain of Jars, which was a big part of the war in Indochina when the US was ruining Vietnam and Cambodia, etc. And there are still cluster munitions on the ground in Laos today. And those are from US supposed self-destruct cluster bombs. We were able to ban them in 2008. Some of you might know that there is a treaty banning nuclear weapons. It passed in 2017. It was passed by the General Assembly of the United Nations. It is not a perfect treaty. It would be perfect if all of the 9 nuclear states were part of it and started dismantling their nuclear weapons, destroying their nuclear subs, et cetera, et cetera. However, that treaty was negotiated in humanitarian terms. And in fact, the nations that do have nukes were livid that the conversation in the General Assembly was with a humanitarian focus, not on the national security between Russia, the United States, Israel, oh God, who all else? Pakistan, India, I can't remember all the rest, but 9 countries. We need to get people to understand there's a treaty to act, to act. You know, sometimes people freak out, at least in my experience, when they think about activism or activists. The root of the word activism, the root of the word activist is act. If you are concerned about climate change, sitting around and talking with your friends about how horrible it is and then doing nothing is not a strategy for change. If you think nuclear weapons are beyond the pale, there is no place for them on this planet, worrying about it is not a strategy for change. You have to act. And no one person changes the world alone. We changed the world on landmines because we worked together, right? In 1,300 non-governmental organizations around the world with the same goal. Let's ban landmines, destroy the stockpiles, clean them out of the ground. Someday, you know, people will really be able to walk without fear. We prevailed because we worked together. We prevailed because we convinced governments that it was the right thing to do. And we actually had allies in the governments, which I have never been a great fan of government, especially after Central America days. We were able to convince governments, though, that it was the right thing to do. And some people in different governments were as pro-ban as we were. In fact, I still see them from time to time on Facebook, although I'm trying not to look at that thing because Zuckerberg is, I won't even go there because that's a whole different conversation. We could have that one the next time we can all get together. But action is the only thing that changes the world. And I think, you know, I think back to how we started with the landmines and, you know, I worked on a fax machine. Probably young people don't even know what it is. I had thermal fax machine, thermal paper, which meant if you did not put it in a file and put it out of the light, it would fade. And every day I would get up and I would fax people, organizations around the world, fax. I'd get up at 3:30, fax. But I was sharing information with them. Information is power. I could have chosen to keep most of the important information to myself, and that would have made me, you know, all powerful. That would have made us fail. People need to be informed and act together. Now, of course, we know we have Facebook and tweet and this, that, and the other. That's fine. Sometimes, but just use it, you know, tweeting something is not action for change. I'm sorry. You can feel good about tweeting something if you wish, but tweeting is not a strategy for change. It is just a different way of communicating from how we did. I'll say it again, and then maybe I should stop talking because I've been talking quite a bit. I'll say it again. Action together with other people is the only thing that changes the world. Complaining to your friends makes you feel righteous. It is not a strategy for change. Get up off your collective butts. Join an organization. If there isn't one that speaks to you, create one. You know, we created the landmine campaign. Then they created the cluster bomb campaign. You know, then they did the arms trade treaty. It was all civil society. It was all people like you and me. I grew up on Western Avenue here in Brattleboro, Vermont, for God's sake, and then Chapin Street. Me, little old Jody, who was afraid of authority until I was a senior in high school. You know, I'm not special. I'm not special. I just care enough to take action, to bring about change, to make the world better for everybody, even people I do not like. And believe me, I don't know, I hope my mom is hearing this. Mom, you know, there are so many people I don't like. But if I only want the world to be better for my friends, it's like a political party. You have to want the world to be better for everyone in it. That's what real change is. So thank you. I will be silent now.
Thank you so much, Jody. But now we get into the real part where we get you to talk about, we've got a little bit of an audience here for Jody, a very tiny little audience at 118 Elliot. So I think she's getting some applause. Jody, you talked about getting everyone together and people being concerned about the rest of everybody in the world, and really looking at our world as a place we all share. I wonder, you know, what you think of President Trump's comments at the United Nations, where he spoke about there's an end to globalism and the beginning of the era of patriotism. I'm wondering how we're supposed to unite globally when nativism seems to be such a problem. And if patriotism is on the rise, so is this concept of national security is just benefiting your nation state and the powerful within it. So I was wondering, you know, if you could comment on that. We have some other questions coming in, but I thought you could get started on that one. Thank you.
The answer is easy. Elect Biden and Kamala Harris. If you believe in authoritarianism, if you believe in patriotism, Mr. Trump also was talking about patriotism as the fundamental element of education. If you believe that, well, you won't be voting for Biden and Harris. If you want to see that, if you don't want to see patriotism being used to advance authoritarianism, you have to not allow Mr. Trump and his people to have another term. It's pretty easy, pretty simple. I just signed up to write letters to people in different, you know, swing states, asking them to please vote. I signed up. I'm going to do it. Everybody can. There are plenty of campaigns that are doing that. You can find them online. I'm happy I can do that. Knocking door to door would not be my strength. So COVID keeping me home to write is great.
That's great. Thank you for that answer. I would say that the defense budget was the same under the Democrats always anyway. I mean, it's not exactly something that's new with Trump, but let's continue. We have a question from Maya Segura, who's also on the Windham World Affairs Council board. And she's wondering, could you talk a little bit about what are killer robots and how are they being deployed by what countries and what circumstances in the world today?
I assume everybody knows what a drone is. a drone is a semi-autonomous weapon, right? The drone is an airplane and it can fly for thousands of miles on its own. But there is a human being sitting back, one of the places they use is Creech Air Force Base in Nevada. So we'll put the pilot sitting in front of the computer at Creech Air Force Base. Okay, so they're flying over the Swat Valley in Pakistan because terrorists abound. And the guy sees something suspicious. The pilot in Nevada on his computer sees something suspicious and he commands the plane to go lower so he can see if this is a viable target. Then he looks at the target and decides yes or no if it is a possible terrorist or group of terrorists, and then he pushes the button to release the Hellfire missiles and blast them to smithereens. That in and of itself is disgusting. But imagine weapons with no human being who could possibly feel empathy. What if a person tries to surrender? The killer robot is that drone with no human being involved in targeting and killing. Right? It's a range of weapons. They're developing killer robot tanks. They're developing attack jets. They're developing killer robots that are small and actually look like a mosquito. And that thing would, fly, land on you, could whack you with some poison. The Russians have some really good poison. They just tried to kill somebody with it. And you die. What human being, I agonize over. What human being thinks it is okay to give machines the power to decide, algorithmically, of course, but to decide who gets to live and who gets to die? If I'm going to kill somebody in war, I should do the killing. I should bear the weight of the decision to kill, not send it off to machines that can either go on the ground. There's submarines that can be killer robots. There, as I said, attack jets. I want to just pose a scenario. Imagine 25 attack jets that are killer robots, fully autonomous, okay? They're flying close to Russian airspace. The Russians take out 25 of their own. Nobody knows what is going to happen when they engage. We do not know their software. They do not know our software. Nobody knows what will happen when those aircraft, fighter jet killer robots connect. There are scenarios where people believe it will lead to nuclear war because the killer robots get out of hand. The Pentagon itself has been hacked more than once. Imagine a hacker, hacking into the system of the US jets. We don't know what will happen. And that's okay. It isn't okay. And the only way to fully test these things is in war. But as we know, many wars have had as part of their reason for existing the need to test new weapons. It's plain and simple. I hope you don't want to see a dystopian world where weapons on their own target and kill. We created a campaign to stop killer robots. We started in my kitchen in 2011. I started nagging my husband. He is the director of the arms division at Human Rights Watch, Steve Goose. We met banning landmines. I started saying, look at this. Look at this, we have to deal with it. It took me about a year to wear him down with my subtle, as you can imagine, I am not subtle. Just, like, this is the next wave of war, we have to do something. And then what we did is call together organizations that we have worked with either on landmines or cluster bombs. And we knew them, we knew how they worked, we knew they were efficient. And so we called a meeting in New York in October of 2012, proposing that we should launch together a campaign, and we launched it in April 2013 in London, and we're still struggling to ban killer robots. They have not been fully used at all on battlefields yet. What our goal has been is to preemptively ban the ability of a machine to kill you on its own, right? There are various ways that can be done, but the goal is to not allow humans to delegate the decision of life and death over another human being to a machine. I want to know how those people sleep at night. I really wonder how they can think that it's not crossing a moral and ethical Rubicon to make that decision. I think that is as pressing an issue as the modernizing of nuclear weapons. I hope you will learn more about the campaign to stop killer robots. It's online, of course, like everything else. And ICANN, which is the organization that led the effort to get the treaty banning nuclear weapons. Join. If you worry about them, doesn't matter, won't do a damn thing. You have to get up and join the action to make it different.
We have a couple of questions coming in about the sort of paradigm shifts and cyber warfare. And one question from Melvin Shaken is, how do you work to protest cyber warfare research being done in this country, China, and Russia? And maybe as part of that, you could talk about who are well, we know obviously the companies in the United States, but where maybe you could touch on also as part of your answer to that question, where the propensity of which nations to create the killer robots and different other cyber technologies besides the US, and maybe even tell us a little bit about some of the private companies that are involved and how activism on those private companies from shareholders and others might also be employed.
I don't work on cyber invasions of, so I can't really speak to the intricacies of how people work on trying to deal with cyber warfare. I know Human Rights Watch does a lot of work on it because of my husband, Goose. But it's above my pay grade. I can't talk about that one with any realistic wisdom or lack thereof. I talked so much, I forgot the second part of the question.
Yeah, it was just, but to go back to killer robots, yeah.
You will not be shocked that the United States is in the forefront. You'll probably not be shocked that Israel is in the forefront. South Korea is in the forefront. India, no, not India, excuse me, Russia, China. Turkey was playing around with killer robots in some of its recent maneuvers. But the main ones are the first ones that I said: South Korea, the US, Israel, Russia, China. Excuse me, I almost dropped some equipment. It's not shocking, and it's the big defense, I think it's obscene, they're called the defense industry, the war industry, the weapons industry, the biggies, you know, Lockheed Martin. Any one of them that's working on nukes is probably working on killer robots. It's billions of dollars, billions and billions and billions that are not just going to Lockheed Martin, they're going to universities to fund research for how can we kill you without a human being pulling the trigger. What does that say about our educational system? You know, I remember Monsanto, which was, oh God, they helped create the Agent, was it Agent Orange in Vietnam? Whatever it was, the name of it. They created it, and there was such an uproar that I think that was at the University of Chicago. They stopped participating. Universities will stop if there are people telling them to stop. You know, it may not happen in a year, it may not happen in 2 years, it may not happen in 5 years. Activism is, in my view, not for the faint of heart, because it is a lifelong commitment in one way or another to act to make the world a better place for everybody. And that takes a little stamina, which doesn't mean you can't take a vacation. It doesn't mean you can't curl up in a ball on the weekend and read 3 books, which I do when I'm feeling freaked out. But action is the only thing that matters.
Can you give us a sense of which universities are at the forefront and working on this technology? Some of us might be alum.
I'm not sure. Harvard certainly has some, MIT, but beyond that, I would have to go and look on the website, because it's mostly, excuse me, it's mostly our colleagues in the Netherlands who are doing all the research on that. POX is the name of the organization. But
Yeah.
I can put people in the direction they need to go if they want more information on that. But divestment campaigns work.
Yes, and all of this information is on your website. What is it? The Campaign to End Killer Robots?
Campaign to stop killer robots.
Okay.
I just wanted to interject here. Peter Barris has had his hand raised for a little while, and I wanted to see if we might just want to let him come in to talk also.
Sure.
And that's just another option for those who are listening, that if you want to raise your hand, that will bring you into the conversation. You can ask your question live. So we're going to bring Peter in to ask his question.
Great.
Peter, you can just unmute yourself.
Is that working?
Yep.
Great.
Cool. Can you see me, or I could turn on a light?
No,
No, we can't.
We can see your picture.
yeah, your picture looks good.
My picture?
Yeah.
If you don't have your video on.
That might be a picture of my mother.
No, it's a male. If your mother looks like that, I pity her.
She's 99 in October.
My mom just turned 90.
Oh
We
my
have a
God.
party for her.
She doesn't really expect to make it to her birthday, but we're hoping. Not to take a lot of time. I was the guy that was asking about a paradigm shift.
Mhm.
There's been a change. I think it's best illustrated by the 2 campaigns of the president. The first one was a joke. The second one, he even boasted about assaulting women, and that was just hot sauce. And the difference is that there's a massive connectivity, and information is not keeping up. What's keeping up is reaction.
Mhm.
So that when he tweets that he's going to bomb Iran or something, 1 billion people go into biological panic,
Mhm.
which is predictable. They can fight, they can flee, they can bunch up together, they can freeze. And half of the ones that flock will flock to him.
Mhm.
And they're all out of the game at that moment. So countervailing that is things like, you see Emma Gonzalez stand up in Washington, D.C. in front of 1 million real people and maybe 5 million people on screens, and stand there silently for 6 minutes with her grief and shock at the massacre of her classmates in Florida.
Mhm.
That, there's a contrast there between that and the tweet in chief, which I think is important and hopeful. Because on one hand, you have somebody inducing a brain state of paralysis and ineffectiveness. And on the other hand, you have someone inviting people to connect to their own humanity. It just moves me to even think about
Yeah.
that. And
Well-
so my question is, this is invisible to most of us because it's outside of the paradigm that we live in. It's actually, we live in this new paradigm, but we're trying to play by the old rules because we didn't see it happen. So nothing works the way I expect it to work. So how can we strategize for this new paradigm? We're in the early days of flight when people are flapping their arms, jumping off buildings, trying to fly. And that's what we got for president. I mean, who else but a circus clown would you get at a moment like that? He was the only one ready.
Mhm.
But we need to evolve quickly. And fortunately, cultural evolution is what drives human development. So we're in it. So how do we strategize? Not really to find an answer, but a way to live in that question.
I can't answer that at this moment in time.
Good.
It's a huge, as you know by asking that question, it's a huge issue, deciding how we want to live post-pandemic. And believe me, there is tons of thinking and strategizing and work going on to try to emerge from the COVID state of the world into a different way of looking at the world.
Well, you know that we've been jammed into face-to-face contact at a scale that's unimaginable, and it's never happened in history.
I mean,
By
because
the COVID virus.
yeah.
And I'm thinking that this face-to-face contact can't be kept up with by the AI bots and the marketing thing. There's too much for it to handle. There's too much that's completely out of its, it's just not even designed to perceive any of that stuff. So the more people are connected face-to-face, whatever they're doing, the more humanity comes together in a sort of global awareness, which I think is a chance for us.
Mhm. Well, believe me, there are multitudinous webinars and Zoom meetings and Zoom. I've been on many.
Oh, last of all, I'm now a new reporter for the Deerfield Valley News.
Awesome.
So I've been taking notes, and it would be nice if I could get in touch with you by email or something.
Sure. You got a pencil?
Yeah, I do have one somewhere.
I could put I could put you in touch after we have everybody's email from the meeting, if that's
That'd be
better.
fine.
Okay.
Sure.
We have some other countries, some other questions. But I like hearing people's voices. Claire, you had a question. Do you want to raise your hand, or if Claire's still there, and ask it live? If not, I have Claire's question here, which is, speaking of peace and the prospects for peace, what do you think of the Israel and United Arab Emirates recent peace accord? And maybe as part of that, Jody, you could just are there any groups, like when we talk about peace, it's such a big, large question, and are there any groups in particular that you could recommend people get involved with that have sort of peace as their goal?
Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. The first two American women to receive the Nobel Peace Prize were Jane Addams and Emily Green Balch. And they were founders of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILPF. They do outstanding work in various arenas of peace. In fact, they are part of the campaign to stop killer robots. They're really awesome. They are the ones that immediately came to mind. I'd have to think a lot more, but there's so many out there. It depends a lot on what your focus is. You know, Wilf is looking at it from a feminist framework. And not to throw around names, but two of my good Nobel friends, Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa and His Holiness the Dalai Lama from Tibet, now residing in Dharamsala, India for I think 50 years now. But both of them in separate events said essentially the same thing, that men have been making something of a mess of the world for millennia. It's about time to kind of let them step aside and let women, you know, take a lead. I think it's better if we can find ways to work together, men and women who believe in the same things, believe that equality matters, believe that diversity matters, believe that women should be paid as much as any man, and on and on and on. But, you know, it just, I think it takes both sides of the coin to advance issues like diversity, like, you know, gender equality, et cetera, et cetera. We need men who are brave enough to stand up with women and work for it. You know, silent support is kind of irrelevant. If you don't do something, if you don't open your mouth, nobody knows that you know, want to be part of a solution. You can't be part of a solution if you don't take action.
Julie, do we have any other hands raised now, or should I go to the Q&A list?
No, but I just wanted to keep encouraging people. If you have questions and want them asked live, please feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to include you in the conversation.
There was a question from Daniel Sicken about youth activism, and how does Jody see us being able to motivate the youth in particular on this issue, particularly when they're so preoccupied with issues like climate change?
Mm-hmm. For me, really, I don't care what you're active on. I just care that you act. You know, in the early days after the Mine Treaty and the Nobel Prize, which, as you know, was shared between me and the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, young people, I spoke a lot at universities and schools and stuff. Young people always said, you know, Jody, how can I become an activist? You know, what should I work on? They always go hand in, what should I work on? And you know, I said, I don't know what you should work on. You know, what is it that makes you burn with righteous indignation at X injustice? What makes you burn? You know, if I feel righteous indignation at some injustice, I can't not do something. You can't do everything. You know, a lot of people think, oh my God, if I can't create world peace tomorrow, I'm not doing anything because it doesn't matter. That's not true. Everybody contributes in some way or another. You even contribute with your inaction because somebody else will steal your power. You know, you have to own your space. You have to own your space and act to see what you want to see in the world. So I would then throw out, like, do you care about the climate? Do you care about X, Y, Z, a couple things? Whichever it is, think about it. You know, think for a while about what really moves you and then find an organization working on it and volunteer. That's how I started. I was volunteer in an organization working to educate people about the war in El Salvador. I was a full-time teacher and I volunteered in the evenings and on the weekends. And then I turned into me, whatever that means. But it made Mom happy. I hope you dare, Mom. The Nobel Prize, you know. It was fun, I have to say. Those Norwegians are a blast. It was a very fun few days.
That's great.
So Jody, we have a question to answer live from John
Sure.
Hagan. I'm going to bring John in.
Hi, John.
Hi, all. Thanks for taking my question. Jody, it's a real pleasure to hear you speak. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I actually teach national security policy at the Air War College at the moment, and we spend quite a bit of time exploring this difference between national security and human security. It might reassure you a little bit to know that we actually use your definition of national security in terms of ensuring the security of the institution of the state. That's actually the difference that we distinguish between national security and human security, being the security of the individuals. I am wondering, and this is an issue we wrestle with, states pursue actions that are in the best interest of the institution. And the landmine treaty is reflective of that. There are states that believed it was not in their best interest to pursue that, and they tend to be the great powers or the powers that benefit from having the landmines, the United States being one of them. So I'm curious, when you're looking at issues like drones or high-tech weapons that give advantage to great power states, how do you, as a nonprofit or as NGOs, what is the strategy for impacting or trying to influence a great power's perceptions of its own interests in, to cut it short, why would the United States want to get rid of this enormous military and technological advantage that it perceives to have and to benefit from? Thanks.
It doesn't want to. You know, negotiations are taking place in Geneva right now, virtually, under the umbrella treaty of the Convention on Conventional Weapons, which I'm sure you know, John. It came about pretty much after Vietnam to try to get rid of to either regulate or ban weapons that cause unreasonable suffering and harm. Well, the discussion on killer robots has been taking place under the banner of the CCW since, I can't remember if it's the end of 2013 or the beginning of 2014. And of course, the US, which like Russia and China, thinks it's the only important power in the world, wants killer robots. That does not mean that there cannot be put enough pressure to make things change. Not overnight. I think when I started, I mentioned the treaty banning nukes. I said it's flawed. None of the nuclear states have joined it, but it is still a stepping stone toward creating an international norm, which does put pressure on states of all sizes. You know, when we were working on the landmine campaign, we had entire regions of the world that made themselves, their region, landmine-free zone. And those were part of the building blocks that led to the treaty. And the United States did not need landmines. That's crap. Excuse my English, Mom. It's crap. Bill Clinton was on the verge of signing that treaty until whichever person is in charge of Korea, you know, started ranting and raving that, oh my God, Korea would fall if we took away landmines in the DMZ, which is also a crime.
I think we might have lost the connection, so let's wait and see.
Yeah, I think.
Jody comes back. Okay, great.
Landmines do not stop, you know, tons of soldiers pouring across the DMZ. A landmine in that situation is like a mosquito bite on the rump of an elephant. The United States refused to sign the treaty. For many of the military, it was because they would never give in to civil society. they would never let normal human beings have a say in what weapons they could and could not use. They said, and who was it? Oh, I can't remember his name right now. He was a Secretary of the Army, but it doesn't matter. He wrote to Senator Patrick Leahy, who was one of the senators at the forefront of congressional efforts on landmines. He wrote and he said, you can't do this. If you do this, it's a slippery slope, and other weapons available to the US military will be at risk because of civil society trying to change what we do. Heaven forbid you should listen to the people you are purporting to protect. One time after the treaty, Goose and I and a delegation from the US campaign went to the Pentagon. And I cannot remember who the man was that led us to whatever the meeting was. But he literally snarled and said, we will never sign that treaty. It had nothing to do with landmines. It had to do with them demonstrating they are the ones who will decide. Well, we don't accept that. We don't accept that. It has to be more than a bunch of guys and a few women who get off on weapons and war. I could go on the getting off on weapons and war, but I will, in the interest of good taste, end that line of conversation.
Thanks, Jody.
Well,
Thank you, John. We also have another question from Claire. Claire, I'm going to allow you to talk to ask your question.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think maybe now it's working.
Try all right.
Is that working now?
Yes.
All right, great. Yeah, thanks, Julie, and thanks, Jody. That is a really interesting talk. I wanted to ask again my question from earlier. With respect to peace, what do you make of or think about the recent peace deal or accord or cooperation, whatever you want to call it, between Israel and the Emirates?
Well, I don't know very much about it. Okay, what I did, I heard some conversations on NPR talking about the fact that the Emirates and Israel, I think, isn't Bahrain involved in this too? Or am I misremembering? But anyway, they have been.
But they haven't done yet.
Okay. That the Emirates and Israel have been working together on security issues for years now. So it's not like it's a dramatic change. It's a public, it's a public change, but it's not a total change of how Israel and the Emirates have been behaving with each other. I don't know how it's going to work out, time will tell. That's, as we all know,
okay,
a very
thanks.
volatile region.
I wonder if I we have another question. I'm just going to look quickly. Oh yeah, well, I'll ask this one after this one. What do you think of the United Nations, Jody? I mean, you largely circumvented the work of the United Nations when you passed the landmine treaty because by its nature, the United Nations moves very slowly. But do you have any thoughts? Most people in the United States, young people in particular, don't really think about the United Nations anymore. Of course, it came up first as the League of Nations and then after World War II. And its whole mission was to create global understanding and dialogue and peace. What do you think the prospects for the United Nations are at large?
Oh, I could go on at length about the United Nations. I led a fact-finding mission about the Sudan wars before this revolution and the stepping down of, I forget his name, even though he's a horrible man. And the story of that delegation, my team, doing the fact finding and then presenting it to the UN is a story in and of itself, hilarious. They were obnoxious. They tried to get me to not come to Geneva and present the report because I didn't write it the way they wanted. Anyway, but that's a longer story. The idea of an international body where states come together is marvelous. The reality is, as it is constituted today, it is essentially worthless. You know, the powers that won the Second World War set it up. And, you know, the Perm Five, the 5 states that are permanent members of the Security Council, they run it, right? If I'm some other little state or even an important state, if I bring an issue before the Security Council that on Yemen, for example, any one state of the Perm 5 can veto it and nothing happens. That's obscene. It was like when we were trying to negotiate the ban on landmines through the CCW that I mentioned, the Convention on Conventional Weapons in Geneva. You could have every single state in that room, less one, want a treaty banning landmines. One state says no, nothing happens. That's an obscenity. That is a dictatorship of one. When the states could not get their act together and amend the existing Protocol 2, there were 5 protocols, 4 or 5 protocols of the CCW. The second one dealt with landmines, but all it did was tell military how they should try, where feasible, to not put landmines in a place where it would hurt people. They could not manage to turn it into a ban. By then, we had convinced enough states in the world that it was fundamental that there be a new treaty banning the weapon, that it went outside of the UN. Canada challenged the countries of the world to negotiate a treaty, come back to Ottawa in 1 year and sign it. And they would sign, Canada would, if it was only with one other state. And that changed the world on landmines. And then same thing on cluster bombs. You know, you could negotiate a treaty in my kitchen if you are a representative of the state, right? I can push for change. It's the states themselves that have to negotiate that change through the UN. But I could have them sit in my dining room and negotiate a treaty. As long as they all agree, as long as they all sign it, as long as they all ratify it, it's a treaty. It's just a treaty is a contract, for God's sake. So anyway, we took it outside and we prevailed. And it gave the world hope that it didn't always have to be the way it was before. You know, I'm as proud of the impact the campaign has had on the model of diplomacy in which we've brought together civil society organizations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, some UN, not the UN itself, like UNICEF, refugees, and governments to bring about change. You know, that is a new model of, it was recognized in the Nobel announcement. And they said that they hoped that that model of change would influence, you know, other efforts to get rid of weapons and create peace. I'm very proud of that. I'm also proud of the fact that it has had an influence on human security thinking as well as humanitarian disarmament. You know, when you start out to do something, we just want to get rid of landmines. And then all these other things have happened and it's awesome. And it shows when a bunch of ordinary people get together, we can kick butt in a positive way. Although I used to beat up my brothers and sisters when I was a child. I still have a tendency to want to whap, I have to be honest.
Yeah.
So Jody, we have another question from another one of our board members, Scott Cooper, and we have to apologize to everyone who's in this talk because we're used to having this forum where we're all kind of sitting in a living room or this church room where we kind of have more intimacy. So I'm grateful that everyone has been so engaged in Zoom. Scott, do you want to ask your question live?
Yes, I'm happy to. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sure.
If
Yes.
my dear grandfather were alive today, who I love very much, if he were here with me listening to your excellent lecture, he would want to ask, since World War II, which he fought in, non-proliferation efforts and MAD, I guess that's mutually assured destruction, has given us over 70 years of nuclear peace. How should I respond to him? Thank you.
You can't prove a negative. Because nuclear war did not happen, you can't prove that it's because the big powers have nukes. No, you can't prove a negative. How about we just get rid of the damn things because they could destroy the world and everyone on it, and think differently. Especially, trips me out in this COVID world. You can have 800 jillion nukes. It cannot change the situation of COVID, making us all sit in our houses and go stir crazy. We have to start thinking of the world as a different place. And that we are not, I think of 9/11. I have lots of thoughts on that too, but I won't go there. Think about 9/11. 2 planes fly into the buildings and they fall down and everybody's hysterical. At that point, the United States had more firepower than any nation on earth. We had more nuclear weapons. We had everything you could possibly want to protect us. It didn't work. We have to stop thinking that militarizing our borders is going to keep us safe and secure. And if people didn't want to believe it, talk to COVID, which is mutating right now into new forms. We have to start thinking about what the other impacts in the world are, how, globalization of the economy has wrecked lives around the planet. Do we really need that? Do we need, what's his name, Bezos? He's going to be the first trillionaire. That is an obscenity. It's an obscenity that 5 billionaires from the US control 50% of the resources of the freaking planet. What planet are we on? Why does anybody think that's okay? It's not okay. It's obscene. And it's because of globalization. We have to start thinking differently or we will kill ourselves off. I can see Mother Earth breathing a hell of a huge sigh, thinking, thank God they're gone. New forms of life will emerge and the planet will probably be really happy because we aren't there polluting the water, polluting the air, building weapons that nobody wants except for the companies that are building them and are in cahoots with the Pentagon, by the way, but that's a whole nother story. The world has to change or we will go down. We'll be the first species that extincts itself. I'll be dead because I'm old. But think of that for your children and your grandchildren. Is that what you want? If you do, I'm worried about you. Well, therapy.
So Jody, I'm glad you bring up climate change because that was the topic of my dissertation, was looking at the relationship between climate change and conflict. And I did that within the Sahel to try to understand this question that the European Commission had, which was, is there a relationship if we have greater impacts from climate change, will we have then, you know, this direct relationship to greater conflicts between people? And I'm happy to say the results from a research that was done around the Mediterranean region and 7 different countries and in the Sahel where I was doing my research was no, in fact, it's not a direct relationship. Human security isn't that. It isn't that there's a climate event and suddenly people pick up guns and start shooting each other. It doesn't work that way. However, the country of Niger, where I worked for many years, in the past 10 years or so, has increased the amount of foreign military. Well, more than 10 years actually, has increased the amount of foreign military that's there. They now have a drone base installed in Agadez. And that was something that was a long fight for the US government to try to establish a drone base somewhere in Western Africa, because it could be easily controlled from Europe, where they have, I guess, a station somewhere in Germany where they're controlling the drones in Africa. So I guess what my question is in relation to kind of this idea of human security and reduced human security as there are more unstable climate around the world, and then this introduction of militarization throughout Africa, despite the fact that there's been a decrease in the amount of conflict across the continent prior to Al-Qaeda and the fall of Libya, let's say. But I wonder if you can speak a little bit about the motivation of the US, if you know, or if you understand kind of the reasons behind this movement towards allowing drone bases in different parts of the world, and what your thoughts are about that in general. You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry. One of the easiest ways to answer it, maybe, is to think about the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
You know, countries in the world were supporting the US and yay, yay, you know, isn't it great? Democracy reigns. Democracy is proven to be the best way forward. And some people actually believed that there would be a decrease in military, a decrease in weapons, and that money would be spent on the greater good. Instead, the United States decided to go for full spectrum dominance, and that means military dominance, along with expanding NATO to the borders of, you know, Russia, putting it right in Russia's face. That is because the US, since the day the little pilgrims stepped on the continent, have believed that they have the right to dominate the world. They just this exceptionalism, right? We hear that. Everybody except America, because we are so democratic and, you know, so good to everybody. Yeah, we have been at war since the pilgrims arrived. There is a professor at Evergreen State University in Washington. I cannot remember his name. However, he has compiled the lists of all of the conflicts, CIA maneuvered coups, et cetera, and wars, of course, that the US has been in since it began to exist. And the last time I looked at it, I have to confess, was quite a few years back. There were only like 4 or 5 years in which we were not involved in something, messing with somebody else. Can you imagine if China did that? Can you imagine if Russia, you know, invaded any country it wanted to in the world? We would not be sitting here and, you know, being happy about it. Why is the US? Why is the US okay to invade whoever they want? The poor Western Hemisphere, oh, they made a mess of it. They made a horrible mess of the Western Hemisphere by their bullying and, you know, invading any country that tried a little independence. It will not change unless we make it change.
We only have about 10 minutes left to the meeting, but I did want to just ask you, Jody, you know, you talk about the U.S. in with the pronoun they, not us. So I wanted you to comment on that, particularly in reference to your comments about the problems with globalization. It seems like a little bit of a contradiction to me when you talk about globalization, or economic globalization is what you were talking about, but the problems with globalization maybe being to, our end. But at the same time, you talk about the United Nations as being an organization that's basically useless. But at the same time, it seems to me like it's the only game in town in terms of refugees, or the World Health Organization, or peacekeeping forces, or even the Millennium Development Goals. So I guess what I would ask is, how does that square? Are you a globalist? Do you consider yourself a citizen of the planet?
I consider myself a citizen of the Republic of Vermont. I'm completely serious. Vermont happens to be in the United States, so be it. But I consider myself a Vermonter. I am something of a global citizen, but I don't think of myself that way. I feel comfortable in, countries in the world and the people around the world, but I'm a Vermonter. It's in my blood and my bones, and I really mean that when I say it. The UN, there are a few agencies that do good work. The UN itself, when I was a kid and learning about the UN and how marvelous it was, and countries came together to solve the issues of the day, bring peace to the planet, I thought, oh my God, how marvelous. Oh, someday I want to go there. It isn't. It's another forum for states to fight with each other for dominance. And the Perm 5 have an upper hand over everybody else because they're the Perm 5, and they can veto anything. How can anybody call that a rational means of changing the world? I'm not saying we don't need an entity, but that one has to be completely reformed in order to be meaningful in today's world.
Yes.
At least that's my opinion.
That's great. It's great to hear you talk about Vermont in those terms, because I think a lot of us have come here from other places because we see it as a national, or, a force to be reckoned with. Are there any other questions from the audience now, or do we want to close the meeting, Julie?
Yeah, there's just one question. I think it's actually a really good question to close on. It comes from an anonymous attendee. And Jody, when you're giving your opening, you spoke about these 1,000 organizations that you were able to mobilize and bring together to act on landmine banning. And so this questioner is asking, what did that communication look like? How do you accomplish something like that? What are the steps? You mentioned the faxes. What other ways?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's a question that would take an hour by.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first started, I went to logical organizations that should have some concern about landmines. Human Rights Watch, because they deal with the laws of war and weapons. Physicians for Human Rights, they were out of Boston. I think they moved to New York, because they care about human rights, war, etc. I went and talked to Mines Advisory Group, which is an organization that does demining, takes mines out of the ground. In the beginning, they were former British troops who created this non-governmental organization to start demining. And Handicap International out of France, which deals with amputees and prosthetics, etc. So just in the beginning, we had covered taking the mines out of the ground. What does it mean to be an amputee and be taken care of, and how much does that cost, and what impact does it have on a peasant family in Vietnam, for example? Then Human Rights Watch and Physicians for Human Rights, the laws of war, which are important to creating a new norm, which just means a new law. So I started with those, and we had a meeting in Human Rights Watch office in October of '92 and launched the campaign with that little group as a steering committee. And we held our first conference in the UK, working with organizations there that were involved in weapons and nukes, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, and sent invitations out to organizations that were likely suspects, like the European Network Against the Arms Trade, or, you know, CND. I can't remember what that stands for, but it has to do with nukes. And we got, the first meeting had maybe, I can't remember now, 70 people, no, probably 40 people from 20 organizations. The next meeting was co-hosted by UNICEF. Imagine that. We went from, you know, nothing to UNICEF being the first UN agency to call for a ban, co-hosted with us a meeting in Geneva. And then we had, it had grown quite a bit. Our third conference of the campaigners themselves, so we could strategize, et cetera, was in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh. It was just coming out of war. It was chaos. We managed to pull it off, and there were 350 people there representing, I don't remember how many organizations. And then they started setting themselves up as, you know, country campaigns. In France, Handicap International was the core of bringing other organizations together to be part of the French campaign against landmines. We had the US campaign against landmines, Cambodian campaign against landmines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And soon we had somebody or some organization from every mined country in the world, and organizations from those countries that made and sold and gave away landmines. So we were coming at it from all angles, and one of the most important parts was the Landmine Survivors Network, who were amputees from landmines. Toon Chanareth was one of my favorites, is one of my favorites, from Cambodia. He lost both legs. But we have from different countries in the world speaking against landmines. And who better to speak against them? They suffered the pain of, you know, stepping on one or picking one up or driving over one or whatever. And certainly their voices shake people up. You don't usually, one of the obscenities of the CCW in Geneva was, you know, they can look out the beautiful windows and look at Mont Blanc and Geneva Lake, and then go into their little conference room and think they've done a hell of a lot of work if they change a comma to a semicolon in a sentence. Well, we brought landmine survivors to their face. That freaked them out. They were having to see the consequences of their semicolon. You know, we couldn't, I said to them one time, I was so angry, I wish I could lift this room up and put it down in Cambodia, and we would not show you the safe lanes out until you banned the weapon. We couldn't do that, but then our deminers created a fake minefield with sensors that they put in front of the door so that they had to go over them to get into the conference room. And I have to say, even though you knew they were fake, it was unsettling to step on a piece of fake ground and have an explosion. There were some diplomats that were such wimps that they went in the back door. But we brought the reality of landmines to them, you know? It's awesome. It's an awesome, well, they still exist, the landmine campaign. The only reason this treaty functions the way it does is because the campaign never stopped.
There's just a follow-up question from that same attendee asking if you enlisted the work of Senator Leahy and Judy Collins.
Leahy, certainly we met with him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I don't remember Judy Collins, but there was,
Princess Di.
oh God, don't get me going on that. That woman went,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have a real thing about celebrities and activism. Some are real. There is no question, some are real. She went,
Sean Penn. Sean Penn.
I've had interactions with Sean. He's an interesting fellow.
Yeah.
Princess Diana went to 2 countries for a couple of days. Her first trip was to Angola. And her second trip right before she died was to somewhere in Europe, I think Bosnia maybe. By then, we were already negotiating the Mine Ban Treaty. You see what I'm saying? Like she
I lost Jody.
Yeah, I can't hear you either. Jody, oh,
can't hear me.
now
there
you're
you go.
good.
Shit.
You're
Sorry.
good.
Okay. And there were some journalists. She died the day that the final negotiations were starting in Oslo. And I had some journalists come up to me and say, oh my God, how are you going to soldier on without Lady Di? Fortunately, my colleague Mary Wareham from New Zealand, part of the Commonwealth, I said, Mary Wareham from the Commonwealth is a better place to answer that question. And then I went away, and whoever was managing the media, I said, don't you let any journalist come near me and ask me that stupid question about Lady Di. She did some good stuff. The treaty had nothing to do with her, and I hate it when famous people are looked upon as the hero, when the heroes are the ordinary people working their butt off every day to make a difference. Sometimes celebrities are great. Really, what's his name? Does the environment. Ruffalo?
Mark Ruffalo.
That dude. I'm not a fan of television and stuff. And DiCaprio, for sure, has done some great work. But they don't try to take credit for by themselves, blah, 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 blah. The credit, the hard work should go to the people who do it day in and day out. And we should stop making everything important by adding a celebrity to it. Drives me insane. Celebrity news, I can't stand it. I can't hear you, Lissa.
Oh,
Your voice is vibrating.
it is. How about now? Well, I think we've come to the end of the program, and it's a good note to end on because it's your hard work and your sort of no nonsense talk. You're on mute, Jody. Jody, you're on mute.
Every single person in those 1,300 NGOs, every single person who contributed in one way or another are the heroes, My computer is going to crash in a few minutes because the power is wasting away.
Well, we want to thank you and thank all the participants today. We'll have this up on our website. We also videotaped it for BCTV with a separate camera and a separate microphone. So I think we'll have a good product up there for people who weren't able to attend. And Jody, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time. And thanks for being a straight talker, because one thing that we hope to do with Windham World Affairs Council in the next year and years ahead is to bring sort of these global problems. They affect us all locally. Mm-hmm. And we all have a way to interact with these issues, whether we think so or not. And that's part of our work ahead. I know that Julie's and Claire and other board members are excited about. So we'll share the links to the Killer Robot organization and look forward to working with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Maybe next time it'll be in person some year.
Maybe next year, let's hope. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody. Think about joining Windham World Affairs
Thank you.
Council, please. Bye-bye.